KTU. As much of the world is dealing with water scarcity and some of these uncertainties in our water cycle and water systems, and we are experiencing all these recurring challenges, some of these water utilities and water managers are encouraged to think actually beyond the conventional water infrastructure networks that they depend on. There is an opportunity for us to rethink and reimagine our system. One part of this, for example, is that if you think about the majority of the homes in developed countries, water comes in, you use it once, it leaves your home, or in the businesses that we have. There is an opportunity to reuse that water once or twice before it leaves your home. Right now, your home, what happens in it is that water comes in with a high quality, and that water is used for purposes that does not require high quality water. So this kind of reuse can reduce the pressure on our existing infrastructure system, and also can reduce the amount of water we are taking from the environment. So this sounds easy and and it is, it's not a difficult thing to do, but it is definitely disrupting the way our infrastructure system or the way utilities function in a way that it changes the demand patterns. It turns consumer to producers, which I call prosumers because they produce and consume. So they actually, the demand patterns in the grid, in the water grid will change. And then that means that we require a better data collection and tracking system that can, in a smart way, understand what comes in, what goes out, and how the pressure in our pipes and pumps needs to be managed. We are building future cities today. We are building communities that are brand new, and we can do that. We can redesign them and rethink the way we use water in these communities. We can incorporate recycling and reuse at every scale. We can minimize demand by focusing on inefficiencies that exist in the system. We can think about how infrastructure, our centralized once-through infrastructure can function without decentralized systems, and how this hybrid model that we are creating between recycling and reuse at different scales and centralized system can function in harmony without necessarily causing any problems. The utilities that we have currently operating these systems have a very specific business model, which is securing supplies and providing water to consumers. And that's how their business model is set up. So when it comes to scarcity and reducing water use and actually promoting water recycling at every scale, which is beyond the whole centralized system, that actually breaks down their fundamental business model in many ways, because it reduces demand for water, which means that some of these utilities, even the publicly owned utilities that are not necessarily in the business of making money, but actually they need the revenue to operate and maintain their infrastructure system, they actually start having problems because the revenue reduction can impact their capacity to do their job. So demand reduction, or actually decentralized water solutions, are not necessarily a friend of our current utility business model, because it just definitely disrupts that system in many ways, disrupts their revenue structure in many ways. And and can create an unhealthy financial setup for them. The policymakers and decision makers have two paths forward. One is to say, okay, I'm in this business, I'm going to try to run it as long as I can. I have been doing it for the past 50 years and hope for the best, or actually gradually embrace this change and try to gradually change their business model to adjust to these new hybrid infrastructure model and new revenue model that they have, in order to be able to maintain their systems, but also be able to manage these disrupting factors. And I would say the most important tool for so many of these utilities, if they want to transition without breaking, is actually using digital technologies, because it enables them to understand how things are changing, what are the different patterns that they're experiencing, who is producing what, when, and how they can make sure they adjust their economic setup and business model in a way that they can embrace these changes without necessarily impacting their economic health of the utility. So this is obviously easier said than done, but there are multiple ways you can approach this. One is when you talk about utilities, as I mentioned earlier, they are designed to secure supplies, as much supplies as they can, and create water abundance for the service area they're serving. However, there's a different path to this. If they better understand what the demand is and how the demand is changing, they don't need to secure water investing in huge, massive centralized infrastructure. They can actually incentivize some of these distributed changes internally. That way they can reduce the cost of infrastructure that they have by building smaller distributed solutions across the board. That's one way. So basically trying to reduce the cost of investing in solutions that potentially can become stranded assets because there's not enough demand to operate those systems or buy resources from those systems. Another way of that is to rethink the way they have set up the rate process. So the rate setting process is depending on the utility, obviously, but many of these utilities have a very specific volumetric setup for their rates. So one thing that the electric utilities did in the US in the late 20th century was they decoupled their rates by taking the cost of operating and maintaining their systems, and which is a fixed cost for them, and making sure that is always recovered regardless. And then on top of that, they have volumetric rate, which is basically the amount of water people use. So no matter how much water you are using, you have to pay for the fixed cost, and then on top of that, you have to pay for amount of water you're using as well. So separating the fixed cost from variable costs enables utilities to always keep the health of their system by making sure there's enough revenue coming in to operate and maintain their system in a healthy way. And then on top of that, they can manage the consumption separately, which means that as you use more water, you pay more, but that's a margin on top of your fixed cost. And as you use less water, you pay less.
Katie,